What is a materials engineer? Materials engineer, quite simply, is an engineer that works with materials, included but not limited to plastics, ceramics, metals, and maybe even composites. Yes, sir.
How does materials engineering differ from composite materials engineering at WSU?
Very good question. I appreciate you asking. Composite materials engineering is a much more specific branch of engineering. By definition, composite materials engineers work with two or more materials within the product. So it might be a mix of metals and ceramics, whereas materials engineers will work with those on a base level. Materials engineers might work with composites, but they will never manufacture composites and work with them directly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, a materials engineer is any engineer that works with a variety of materials. The big three that they are used are ceramics, plastics, and metals. Those are like the real base of the industry. It's the most common you'll see used. Tasks when becoming a materials engineer, you must review new product plans, make sure that the plans are feasible and that they will be done in a costly manner and on time. Supervise work, not only of your fellow engineers, but of your lab techs, kind of making sure everything's going smoothly. Analyze data and test results. This may be from products they create or even products they receive that they're going to use, materials they might melt down. They need to test it, see what properties they can gain from that. They'll even plan their own projects as a materials engineer. Classes and majors. All engineers in any branch will go through a general engineering education. Then they'll go through math, science, physics, and English, which is important for language skills, working with teams, and writing reports. So after that, they will go into specific engineering education. So for example, here at Winona, all students will go through 2 years of broad general engineering education. And after those 2 years, they'll go into the specific composite materials engineering to finish out their degree. Physical demands, work conditions. For materials engineering, a majority of your work is going to be in an indoor office setting. Fairly safe. You're not going to have really any encounters there that are dangerous. In the lab, however, you have equipment that could be dangerous. Chemicals may be used that are harmful. A lot of hand-eye coordination is used to work with this equipment and chemicals, and it can require a lot of standing and walking. So there you can get some dangers, but engineers are really well educated with how to work with these so that they don't have these safety issues. Job-related interests, when we look at materials engineering, there are big two. There's investigative and realistic. It's very investigative because you are constantly looking over things. How can we make it better? How can we make this lighter, faster, cheaper, stronger? You're not ever settling. You're always reworking your work, reworking other people's work to make the best products available. It's very realistic. It's a very hands-on approach. A lot of the stuff you make is going to be you'll see it go from design to be finalized as a product, and it's going to be stuff that's sometimes used in everyday lives. So it's very realistic applications. Acquire knowledge. As I mentioned with the schooling, you're going to learn a lot of your general knowledge through classes, production, processing, design skills, mechanical tools. You get a very general introduction to those in college. And then when you find a place that you work for as a career, they'll really sit you down, give you the specific training you need to work with their equipment and to get their job done. And for almost all engineers, a bachelor's degree is required. Career preparation and hiring practices. So you're really going to want to refine a view of a career as an engineer. So in this case, materials engineer. You're going to want to know fully what is expected of you to complete that job. Really know, okay, what are these employers looking for as a materials engineer? And then you're going to start applying to various companies that need materials engineer, that specialize in materials engineering. Application process very similar to anything people have experienced. Your resumes are screened. You go through a series of phone interviews, usually 2 of them. Then you have an in-person interview, very standard. After the first interview, it kind of gets a little different from the traditional process. Your second interview will typically be with a group. It might be your team of engineers or your lab team or both. It's not even uncommon. I've heard of interviews taking place in a bar or social setting. You really just want to make sure that the team works well together and that they have a good chemistry. When we look at wages, nationally, materials engineers make $41.98 hourly and $87,300 annually. Minnesota's a little bit lower, make $41.77 hourly and $86,900 annually. And a side note on that, when we look at the high end of pay, Minnesota is less than the national average by about $11,000. So for someone looking for a job, they might want to consider another state just to receive some higher wages. Something to keep in mind. Job outlook on a national level, not the strongest numbers out there. 7,500 job openings from the years 2012 to 2022. About a growth of about 0%, fluctuates between -2% and 2%. And these isn't the best numbers, and it's really because it's such a refined industry. It's not like civil engineering, which is used all over the place in such a broad spectrum. This is really refined, and so the need for it, not necessarily going to be less, but it's a lot more specific. It's just not going to be required in every place you go. Advancement opportunities, once you are hired as a materials engineer, really any engineer kind of has a similar hierarchy. You'll be an entry-level engineer 1, and you'll be supervised by someone above you. And that'll last, it's like a probationary period, and then you can kind of prove out of it or test out of it, showing, hey, I know what I'm doing, can work on my own. And then you become an engineer 2, and you're very dependent. And you might sit at this position for about 5 to 7 years. That's the average. Once you've really proven you know everything and you know your craft and you can do a good job, you'll be promoted to senior engineer, which is the highest level engineer that they offer. I'm not saying you can't get promotions within any of these stages. It's just the titles don't usually change that much. And after that, you may be promoted to manager. Job listings, when we look at Minnesota, as I mentioned, job outlook's not the greatest for this field. There are only 12 currently listed in the state of Minnesota, all located in the Twin Cities, so there's not very much range for where you can go. This is kind of interesting because in Winona alone, with the composite materials, it's just there's a lot more variety just because that's kind of a big thing in the city. The most 3 recent posted are Vista Outdoor, which is a federal contractor. The nice thing about that is it works with the government. You can usually make a little more money that way. Nevers Industry Inc. and Stratasys. So key findings, interesting facts. As I mentioned in that last slide, the job outlook, especially in Minnesota, is really low, whereas composite materials engineering in Winona and the Twin Cities, I mean, throughout the state, has a much higher outlook, but that's a kind of a special circumstance due to the college and the program they offer. But however, while there are less jobs, the wages are on average much higher than a composite materials engineer. So it's very similar, especially when you look at just the definition of the engineering to composite materials engineering in Winona, but it's very different at the same time. So my thoughts, pros, as I mentioned, the wages are higher than typical engineering. The general education makes it a little bit easier. You have a little wiggle room with what you want to do and what you want to study to become a materials engineer. But on the flip side, your career prep is a lot harder because it is a little more broad, and you really have to know what you're doing and know a lot of things to be hired. And job placement is really a big con for me, so it's not that easy to find a job, especially in the state of Minnesota, where I want to stay. So ultimately, I would not pursue a career in materials engineering. So there's my references, and I will open up to any questions. Yes.
Yeah, you said something about the education. They almost always need a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so engineering, especially if you look at your really standard ones like civil, materials, aeronautical, always going to require bachelor's degrees. There's just a lot of learning. Some engineering titles, such as like say sanitation engineer, a little more loosely fitting. You can get other vocational programs to do, and there's other forms around that. So, all right. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great day.
There you go.